Hi, welcome to our podcast. We are exploring the world of usually we look at like great stories, and now we're looking at great bad stories. We had done one previously, and actually got a couple of requests that we go deeper into some of the ones that we were identifying. As we mentioned, we kind of think of them as potential companies for the graveyard of incredible brands that die. Some of them come back, and so the life cycle of that is interesting. But we're going to go deeper into some of these. So I'm going to hand this over to Sean, who's going to take us down a weary path to some of the companies you've been thinking about.
Well, one in particular got a lot of buzz because it's not that well known. It came and it went so quickly. You blink and you would have missed it. And it's a company called Quibi. Um, and people asked for a little bit more detail on that. So that's where I really want to start because I think there's an interesting lesson here. Quibi was found a niche in consumable video content. They figure there was an audience that was standing in line, that was doing the commute, that was on trains, that was on buses, that were consuming content on their phones, but they didn't really have access to high quality content. A lot of it was user generated, YouTube and Instagram and so forth. So they thought if we put studio production values into tiny 10-minute micro episodes of a series with well-known actors such as Anna Kendrick starred in one, then they would capture this mobile consumer market that wasn't on their screens at home or their televisions, but were on in transit. And not only that, you had Jeffrey Katzenberg was one of the founders from the DreamWorks setup. So credible studio clout. Early investors were people like Disney and Sony and NBC Universal, people that were already involved in this production space. And they raised 2 billion. And I guess my question is this. Presented with those facts, here's a niche that's unserved. Here's a captive audience with their phones. Here's some serious backing measured in billions of dollars of funds raised by studios, run by a very well respected studio head. I'm speculating, okay, I'll speak for me. I would probably have invested a little bit. I don't have 2 billion, you may be aware, but I would have probably put a little bit away. Tom, you're an active investor. Would you have been tempted by that story?
I think I would. Yeah. What I would love to know. Yes. First of all, to answer your question simply, yes, I would have been very
All the
interested
creds.
in that. I'd
All
be
the
I'd be
creds.
worried I was missing the next big boat. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yeah.
What I really want to know is what failed, what happened, and then what would be interesting to do is for us to kind of reverse engineer our strategic process and say, what may have been the red flags there?
Right.
I
Well,
mean,
it's great.
it sounds great. You think you've got the needs laid out, right?
Yeah.
And as an investor, you do. I mean, part of the metrics that I look at in making an investment is what funds or what big names are going into this particular company, assuming that
Yeah.
they make good investment decisions, right? So yeah, that's I would have been in for
Yeah,
sure.
I think, and that's the thing. It's compelling, and you think to yourself, well, and also there's that idea that asymmetry of information. They must know something. All this money going into it. There is a momentum trap. Yeah, everyone jumps on the bandwagon, and you all go off the cliff together, sort of thing. But in this case, what happened was it wasn't so much the idea itself was inherently bad. It never really got a good testing because it launched during COVID when everyone was locked down. And if not locked down, working from home, and even as we came out of that frankly crazy time we all lived through, is people weren't commuting and weren't sat outside of their homes with a spare moment to catch up on a 10-minute Quibi episode. So the numbers never took off. And even when people started to go back, this is a great example of scenario planning, I guess, to answer preempt your question about what could we have done, is, if those people aren't there in that liminal space between work and home, then we don't have an audience. And as it happens, that is what happened. Also, people didn't necessarily want high quality content on their phones. They were quite happy that there's an appeal to the sort of amateurish. And by the way, some of the amateurish stuff on TikTok and Instagram is really well put together. And depending on what you're looking for, it's very funny. It's very original. It's got a lot of creativity involved in it. So there was no real need to take that experience of the home onto a 6-inch screen. And not only that, people couldn't socialize it. They made it so it was a lockdown in the app. You couldn't take snippets and send them to people. And as anyone, I say, well, maybe this is hindsight, as anyone will know, you've got to create a sort of viral effect these days,
Yeah.
particularly if your users are these younger tech savvy folks. You've got to make sure that people can say, oh, have you seen this episode that Anna Kendrick was in on this Quibi, blah, blah, and send it so people can look and, oh, I'm going to sign up for that. But there was no way to see it, to share content.
Mm.
So that stopped the spread. But I will say they did one thing strategically very well, and that was they pulled the plug quickly. As soon as they realized or they reached the conclusion that they were flogging a dead horse, they said, let's pull it. They spent $1 billion on content creation. That was sold at a discount to another platform. They cut their losses. And not that we're here to talk about the sunk cost fallacy, but that is something that businesses have a habit of thinking, well, we stuck 2 billion in, let's keep going. This has got to come good. Let's tweak it. Let's add this. Let's add some ads or whatever it was going to be. The point is, they did one thing strategically very smart, and they went, nah, this is not working, and they pulled the plug and killed it stone dead, which is not a very positive good thing, but it was still a good thing because I don't think the future was there. So that's why it failed,
Wow.
Tom. Lack of adoption, lack of need, or an over anticipated need, um, and never got any traction.
Look,
I wonder, did they ever do any market research? To kind of or pilot? Do you know if that was part of like did they pilot?
No, they launched a ton of content. The films that they launched, I forget the names of them, but there was at least three or four pretty large programs that they'd already committed to, and they had something like 100 and odd programs in the pipeline that had been commissioned and writers had been hired. So whether they did, I don't know. Maybe that's proprietary information. They certainly went at a pace, which would imply if they did, they didn't research for long or listen long. Maybe I'm speculating, but they certainly had a strong pipeline of production, which would imply they'd greenlit this thing big time.
I what stands out at me, and I may be sort of over-indexing on one of the comments you made about COVID and the fact that there wasn't this commute time. So many people were working from home. To me, it is this idea of understanding trends, but not just understanding trends for the trend's sake, but how trends are going to impact customers in the marketplace. And even if who predicted COVID? Nobody knew that. But there was this trend that got really accelerated, this work from home trend, this remote working trend. And
Yeah.
so, one of the things that could have been done is to examine that trend and say, what if that trend accelerates? What if companies just really realize that the productivity of people from working from home is good enough, and the savings on commercial rent,
Well,
allows it to happen. That would have radically impacted the amount of screen time that this target market would have had, and
yeah.
it would have been something that maybe would have caused a little bit more
Well, here's a question for both of you then,
caution.
because you think about the way they looked at it. It's not uncommon that when we go through scenario planning or future trends and risks and opportunities. I don't know about you guys. I know when we work together, we see this. Often people don't think of the really big things. Maybe it's in this high impact, low probability in their mind, and it never makes the grade. I was smiling a little bit because when you mentioned about COVID being a surprise, Tom, you may remember because you were on a plane and you had to leave the country instantly to avoid getting quarantined with me for 3 months, which apparently you didn't look forward to. But the idea was that we worked with a company that made the very sort of assays and tests that became massively in demand post COVID. And we went through a scenario planning. And we never came up with the what if there was a major pandemic, whether it be flu or a novel coronavirus or whatever it was. That had a massive positive impact, by the way, for them, but no one considered it. And I just wonder if that's the question for you. I won't over ask the question. Why do people not think at those high impact, low probability ideas when they're scenario planning?
Yeah, I mean, and well, I mean, I don't know, but I know that if we're working with them, we force them to look at that. You know, look at the things that are low probability, high impact, and at least have a plan for them. You know,
Yeah,
our own company, we had the, kind of like your assay company, we had part of the positive effect that came out of COVID was that we were really ready for delivering workshops virtually. It was in reaction to a different trend, the trend that just said companies are going to want to leverage technology to reduce their training costs. We started thinking about that in 2014, 2015, and we started to make plans to deal with that. Um, Slowly over the ensuing 5 years, and we were ready because a different thing came along called a worldwide pandemic, but we were ready for that. I guess it's similar. That's why I thought about the Quibi thing is there was this work from home trend that was happening that was limiting that commute time. People were doing,
yeah,
the total number of commute hours was reducing, and if they would have scenario planned a world where that was radically reduced, would they have done things differently? I don't know, but it is a way to systematically begin to make sure you don't make the Quibi mistake,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I go back to my bases days. We used to forecast all kinds of new technologies. And one of the critical things to having the inputs to tell companies, how big this idea was to simulate it. And we would create that technology as closely as we could and put it in customers' hands and then get their reaction. And it blows my mind that, all those smart people didn't take some version of, even a very rough 10-minute to just start putting it in people's hands and then measuring how likely are you to use this. And by the way, you can't share it. And are you willing to pay X for it? I mean, maybe they killed it because of the price. We don't know, or maybe it was just too hard to get on there. They didn't work out the bugs, it sounds like, to be able to have a proper forecast. And the forecast would have been a lot less than 2 billion. If you pay somebody to do that type of research for you,
yeah.
it doesn't cost you $2 billion that helps you in that investment spending. So whenever you have something like that, put it in the customer's hands in any prototype way you can and start to get some type of reaction before you do that. But I think it's a great bad example, Sean.
Well, I totally agree. And you think about how often have we heard in workshops when people talk about companies they admire, and a lot of people admire Apple, and a lot of people you hear some corporations say we want to be like the Apple of X, whatever X is, whatever their product is, they want to be this innovative product led. And I think in some ways that's also to blame. I think innovation and boldness and forward looking are all great things, but because Steve Jobs was unique in saying, I'm not going to market test this iPad. People are going to want it when they see it. I'm going to build it. That's a one in 1,000 CEOs have that foresight. So a lot of people might be thinking, you know what, this thing, it's high quality, it's production values, it fits on your phone, it's got good names behind it. People will want this. And maybe they skipped, and I'm speculating, but maybe that overconfidence in build it and they will come is partly to blame. So I always think it's a cautionary tale when people say we want to be like the Apple of blah blah, and I often say, could you though? Could you be with your risk management and your structures and everything? Is that feasible? And maybe it shouldn't be feasible for a lot of people because it's risky.
And Apple did have some things that really flopped. They just had some that were big too. So, not that everything that they brought out worked well. They just had enough money to absorb some of those real,
Yeah.
flops.
Yeah, it's like the
So,
venture capital model. When it worked big, and then they paid for all the speculative losses, I suppose. But yeah, totally. It's got to be an all-encompassing mindset when you're launching new products, whether it's Quibi or anything else. You've got to understand the portfolio approach, the when to research, when to test, when to double down. I mean, it's a scary world, but
yeah, hold
every
them.
bad
You need to
example.
know when to hold them and you know when to fold them. Is that what you were
Now, if
saying?
only I had my guitar with me, we could have broken out into a little glee club right here then. But anyway,
Just
Tom, get
checking,
on the
just checking.
piano. Tom, get on the piano. Tom's our resident pianist.
Right outside the door here.
So, all right. Well, that is a deeper dive into one of them. On I definitely learned some new things from Sean. I always do. So hopefully you have some ideas if you're going to launch something really big and marvelous. You might want to think a little bit more, test a little bit more before you actually launch it and spend your billions of dollars. So anyway, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.